Echoes rise from the valley low. Shadows stretch where the cold winds blow. A thousand voices in the storm.
The Painter of Shangri La, the spiritual vision of Tibet, the life, work, and art of the legendary painter and thinker, Nicholas Roerich. At first light, the mountains are an instruction. Their plains flare from ash to rose, from cold sapphire to a faint greenish glow that feels like breath. In the windless minutes before dawn, Nicholas Roerich kneels in a tent whose canvas is stiff with frost, grinding a pinch of pigment into binder. He waits. He listens for the color the way a musician listens for pitch. By feel more than ear. The peaks ahead are not only cliffs and snow, they are annunciations. He opens a small notebook and traces a sentence about mountains and conviction, one he will later set down in Heart of Asia. He had come to the Himalayas seeking something larger than grandeur, a verification. The day will decide if he has the hands to receive it. The first stroke is a thought, not a line. He lays a cool band of tempera across the paper, a flat, breath-colored plane that will become atmosphere, the barely visible stair by which the eye will climb. He has painted Russian forests, medieval ramparts, saints in caves, the burned gold of ritual banners. He has designed theaters that make myths walk. But it is here, among these plateaus, that his painting turns into a discipline of ascent. He is learning to paint not merely the mountain as object, but the mountain as practice, the slow, lucid climb of attention. Color organizes the day. He sorts bowls, the violet that will carry shadow without sorrow, the ultramarine that holds its tone even in high light, a reluctant apricot for the moments when snow blushes and then withdraws. He considers the order of planes, the way a steady ladder of values can lift the eye without strain. He knows tempera will dry quickly. The weather at altitude demands this exactitude. Then the brush moves again, 2 or 3 broad masses, a pause, a breath, a few clean edges that feel like vows. He withholds detail the way a monk withholds speech. The silence grows articulate. Outside, bells grate softly as the caravan rouses. The cook's fire catches. Tea thickens with butter. A pack animal coughs as if the air were an herb too strong for the lungs. Men still in bedrolls turn, adjust, sit up. He sets the panel aside and steps out into the minute when the world rehearses being visible. He is not composing a postcard. He is recording a metamorphosis, of light into form, of seeing into reverence. Later in the day, the wind will rise and streak the snow into long, pale flags. For now, all is intention. The mountains place a hand over his haste. He has often described conviction as something gathered, not asserted. Looking at the Himalayas, he learns to gather more slowly. He inventories again what he has brought: boards the size of a palm, a wrap of brushes, a roll of paper, cakes of stubborn color, small tins of binder, a few talismans, a scrap of cloth, 3 tiny circles embroidered on white. He smiles at the banner's symbol. Art, science, and religion within the embracing circle of culture. It had come to him as a sign and slowly hardened into a pledge. For the moment, the sign remains folded. Paint is his herald. The sky clarifies until it is almost green. He marks the place on the panel where the path will enter, measured to suit the stride of 2 small figures. He leaves them suggested, not stated, because the viewer should be able to walk here without tripping over anecdote. The rest of the caravan roars to life. Leather creaks, yak tails swish, the cook pours the last of the tea. Soon they will shoulder the day and climb. He will carry in his mind a slope arranged in intervals like a chant in steps. The mountain will, in time, return the favor and carry him. The boy who would make mountains speak. Nicholas Roerich was born in St. Petersburg in 1874, a city squared to the compass but flawed by water and sky. His childhood had the double rhythm of a Baltic port and an old capital, the creak of masts and the echo of cathedrals, barges nosing along canals and icons flickering behind glass. He was the sort of boy who would leave a table to peer at a stone, then return with a drawing of what the stone once was, a wall, a citadel, a sign left by people who had believed in their buildings. Adults called it imagination. He sensed it as listening. Rocks speak, history murmurs. A painter's job is to give those voices a crisp mouth. He trained doubly. Law at the university to satisfy good sense, and art at the Imperial Academy to satisfy a deeper law. The academy brought him to masters who impressed upon him the stern kindness of structure, that a painting must be able to stand without pleading for attention, and that color should ring like a bell rather than smear like a rumor. He learned to lay planes cleanly, to argue with the eye until the eye relented and agreed that the mountain was not a triangle, but a series of tones that made a promise. He also studied archaeology, the sort that requires knees in the dirt and afternoons in weather. He helped supervise digs on burial mounds and old town sites, transcribing pottery shards like phrases overheard in a dream. Here he began to suspect that culture was not just the sum of beautiful objects, but the discipline that makes beauty possible, a shared vow to remember. The young painter entered circles that cherished that vow. In the magazines, salons, and theatre projects that would coalesce under the banner of the world of art, he found a language for turning the past into a modern presence. He painted princes and saints, fortresses and banners, not to escape modernity but to give it ballast. When he designed stage worlds for Diaghilev's productions, he learned the economy of essentials. Proscenium is confession. A backdrop can teach a dancer how to breathe. His designs for Stravinsky's Ritual Thunder, the earth-stamping ballet that would scandalize Paris, proved that he could sculpt time with cloth and pigment. Old Russia was not a museum for him. It was a living person, stern and generous, capable of instructing the present. Across these years, he met Helena Shaposhnikova, Helena Roerich, whose mind moved with high clarity and whose spiritual thought ran toward the luminous. Their companionship changed his work's temperature. Conversation in their house could step from aesthetics to metaphysics without stumbling, from pigments to conscience, from theatre to the inward fire of discipline that the two of them in different ways would later call Agni, the subtle flame. They understood each other as people who had not come together to make comfort, but to labor for a scale of goodness capable of enduring. When the 20th century began to break in half, he was nearly 40, old enough to have found a voice and young enough to discover that voices must be refounded when the earth shakes. Political storms sent him out of his first homeland, and sickness briefly dimmed his faculties. In that dimness, he noticed something stubborn inside that asked to be fed, not applause, not even stability, but purpose. The answer would come from mountains. Eastward, the turning of a life. Exile is not only departure, it is a recalibration of sight. Roerich left a Russia that had given him everything: training, commissions, the certainty that his stage designs and historical canvases mattered. He passed through Finland and Sweden, through London's mist and America's clarity, carrying with him an appetite that grew whenever a map showed the Himalayas as an elongated oval of pale relief. He gave lectures, opened exhibitions, raised funds, then, like a man tightening a pack for a long walk, began to shed what would not be needed for altitude. He and Helena studied the languages, scriptures, and histories of India and Tibet with more than scholarly curiosity. The texts felt like instruments he would need in thinner air: the songs of the saints, the lives of Tibetan teachers, the Sanskrit names that taste like bright water. These were not decorations to him. They were provisions. He read of Shambhala, the hidden kingdom of wisdom, not as a fantasy, but as a method of attention, a proposition that goodness organizes itself even in the darkest epochs. He began to sketch a cycle of paintings in which riders flame across night skies, Banners tilt into wind, and high passes glow as if lamps had been set in stone. The move to Asia was not impulsive. He set it in place the way he built compositions: ground, then planes, then decisive edges. The ground was the conviction that the arts must shake hands with science and spiritual culture if they are to be more than delicacies. The first plane was travel. Go see the mountains that have been talking to you on maps. The second plane, create a team that can listen in multiple registers: botanists, historians, linguists, artists, guides. The decisive edges were permits, routes, logistics, the dry arithmetic that, if done honestly, frees the imagination to perceive accurately. He imagined a caravan as a moving laboratory. The elevation would keep the noise down. The monasteries would lower it further. He would paint and write, and Helena would record the luminous seams of thought that ran through their days. Their older son, Yuri, often called George, had a mind that loved languages and mountains at once. Their younger, Svetoslav, had hands already sure in paint and an eye that could carry a room. This was not adventure for its own sake. It was an inquiry. What does the world look like when you remove the haze of haste? What do mountains teach about human beings, and what can a painting show that a sentence cannot? And so, somewhere in the middle 1920s, they turned decisively toward Asia. Cargoes were crated, papers signed, well-wishers embraced. The painter had long been translating the language of walls and saints. Now he would learn the syntax of snow. In the imagination, mountains often arrive as triangles. In person, they are a grammar of plains and an ethics of patience. He was ready for both. The Central Asian expedition into the blue of altitude. The caravan crossed Sikkim in a procession of green rhododendron and bamboo, rain and cloud before the trail braided itself into the scoured light of high country. Ladakh showed them a palette that had refused to learn green. Stone made the rules here, and sky enforced them. In Chinese Turkestan, the sand breathed heat by day and stored cold by night. Oases rang with water like bells in bowls. They stepped through gorges and across gravel deserts, past walls that remembered empires and stupas that remembered vows. Towns like Khotan and Kashgar did not feel like points on a map, but like syllables in a long, old prayer. Roerich painted rapidly, with economy, saving finish for the studio but capturing the essential notes while the light was still tuned. He knew that in such weather a painter must dismiss sentimentality as a luxury that costs breath. He tracked the changes of sky's temperature hour by hour, marking how morning green yields to noon blue and dusk returns the borrowed rose. He learned the habits of snow, how it lies taut on leeward slopes and ragged on windward, how in some lights it reads as pale heat. He essayed monasteries that stood like cliff-born vows, their steps the legs of prayer. He recorded the slope of prayer flags as a measure of wind's arguments, and the tilt of shadow as a gloss on the day's theology. Then in the bare center of that vast high, the caravan was halted. Although their documents were in order, orders came from a distant official. No passage. They waited. Weeks sloughed into months. Winter put its knife in the air and twisted. Tents stiffened like fallen doors. Supplies dwindled to rations. Then rations to careful, honorable hunger. Men sickened. 2 died. Horses stood thin and watchful, ghosts of their summer selves. In the worst of the cold, the painter's hands cracked as if the air were a saw. He grew quieter. What he had come to learn about the mountain was now being taught without courtesy. How do you keep faith in such weather? You make the day small and keep it tidy. He inventoried pixels of good. A match that struck on the first try, a cloth successfully mended, the memory of apricot warmth on Kanchenjunga after sunset. He still painted, not much, not for exhibition, but to keep the practice warm. A few planes and a horizon, a shadow exactly placed so that hope could rest against it without slipping. He taught himself the ethics of edges: soften when mercy is needed, sharpen when clarity is just. He watched Helena keep the heart of the camp from freezing. He watched his sons grow older, not in years, but in steadiness. Winter was a quarry. They took from it a discipline sturdy enough for the rest of their lives. At last, permission arrived like a thin ladder lowered into a pit. The party moved south, slower, leaner, with a quietness born of inventory. They would remember those months whenever they looked at a broad plain of snow. In later canvases, the white fields are not emptiness, they are witness. The man who painted them had sat inside such silence long enough to know its weight. When viewers said his mountains looked simple, he did not correct them. He knew how many nights were folded into each clean edge. Writing the mountain, Heart of Asia. Travel fills a sketchbook. In Roerich, it also filled a book of sentences as deliberate as brushstrokes. Heart of Asia, published after the expedition, reads like a braided journal, part itinerary, part folklore anthology, part ethics. If many travel books arrange themselves around the traveler's ego, this one keeps stepping aside to let mountains and monasteries speak. He writes of caravan bells as if they were metronomes for patience, of butter lamps as if they were a philosophy, of wolves as punctuation. He argues in passing that the world is older than we think and more present than we allow, and that attention is the only correct politeness. The chapters often begin with a thing seen, a banner in wind, a stupa painted with wanderers' hands, the blue geometry of a pass, and then rise into meditation. He quotes proverbs as if they were stones in a pocket, not for weight, but for texture. He listens to stories that local elders give him, of treasure-concealing saints, of hidden kings who wait for the hour when war-weary peoples will finally choose wisdom, of teachers who sang their way through hunger. He does not mock. He knows how quickly irony freezes at altitude. When he considers the Himalayas directly, he writes not as a tourist, but as a craftsman discussing an instrument. You cannot compare these peaks to others, he argues, because the instrument here is tuned to a different register, one that asks the soul to be quiet before it inquires. The green-tinged morning skies, the afternoons that thin into blue austerity, the blunt clang of evening light, these are not decorations but teachings. The mountains govern proportion. They cure exaggeration. A man who has spent a few weeks in their discipline, he suggests, naturally lowers his voice. The book is full of small economies, glances at economics and trade, crisp appreciations of local medicines and herbs, nods to the accuracy of ancient chronicles. He does not rub the caravan's hardships into the page. When the detainment appears, it is handled like a cliff, brief, factual, and faced with a functional rope. You sense the deaths not in adjectives but in the way the sentences tighten. Then the prose exhales into a new valley. In the closing pages, the mountains refuse to become metaphor. They remain themselves, and because they remain themselves, they acquire their quiet radiance. The reader finishes with the feeling that a path has been walked, not merely described. How he painted the ineffable. Observers often note that Roerich's mountains look simple, large, resolute plains of color. Edges like incised stone, minimal surface fuss. That simplicity is disciplined. Tempera's matte surface refuses tricks of gloss and glazed depth. It asks the painter to commit to tonality and edge, to wring atmosphere from adjacency, blue next to bluer, and then a knife of white that is both snow and silence. The peaks feel carved rather than modeled because he lets value do the talking. He preserves horizons with a kind of courtesy. He builds skies the way a singer warms a hall, with tone rather than ornament. His training in the visual language of icons offered him a grammar for the spiritual image that did not rely on spectacle. In icons, the world is assembled to be read rather than entered. Depth is moral before it is optical. He took from that discipline the courage to compose with broad, legible forms and the trust that emptiness can be articulate. The open blue behind a monastery is not blankness, it is the space in which a vow can breathe. Likewise, his limited palette is not poverty, it is concentration. To restrain color is to focus its eloquence. Technically, he built many Himalayan canvases as a musician builds a chord. First, a ground, a mid-tone that would become air. Then stepped planes, each a tone in a vertical progression. He sharpened some edges to cut cold. He softened others until they read as distance rather than vagueness. He left shadows cool, even at noon, and reserved warmth for inflected snow at dawn. for the faint apricot that flickers between cloud and ridge. He made negative space affirmative. Because tempera dries quickly, he worked in a tempo aligned with mountain weather. The medium's constraints trained his attention to the next necessary plane. The discipline also has a theatrical ancestry. As a stage designer, he had learned to tell the truth with a few large forms, to persuade with silhouette, to trust that the right incline of a backdrop could make a dancer lean into a leap. That economy never left him. Even when he painted highly detailed architectural ensembles, a lamaserie set in a comb of cliffs, a terraced village clinging to slope, he stayed loyal to the mass. Small things were not permitted to riot. The eye moved in sentences, not exclamations. There is finally the spiritual intention that tremors through his surfaces. He did not separate technique from devotion. He was not trying to impress the connoisseur's lens. He was building an instrument for seeing clearly. That is why, in front of a canvas like Tibet, Himalayas, or Path to Kailas, you often experience not a story but a posture. Your breath lengthens, your shoulders settle, the eyes climb without effort into the clean-limbed air. The painting is not a window but a method. He painted to adjust the beholder's stance toward a steadier kindness. The Tibetan suite, saints, strongholds, and the road to Kailas. The expedition ripened into paintings that read like parables. Consider Path to Kailas, of which he made several versions. In one, a red boulder carved with prayer syllables fills the foreground. Beyond it, a path tilts toward a white, faceted mountain under a greenish sky. Two travelers move as if inside a chant. The arrangement is an ethics lesson. The script on stone is a human vow. The mountain is the vow's horizon. The path is the daily method by which promise is turned into gait. The palette is restrained. Reds, whites, stony violets, a breath of green, so that you are not dazzled away from the proposition. The strongholds of Tibet works treat architecture not as scenery, but as character. Fortresses march along ridgelines like vertebrae of an animal bred for altitude. Angled walls catch a pale sun. Stacked houses cling to slope as if clinging were a kind of prayer. He paints the buildings with respect, simplifying without condescension, as if he were sketching the bones of a creature he loved. In these pictures, civilization looks neither fragile nor triumphant. It looks situated, a precise answer to a precise terrain. In Tibet, Himalayas, roofs and stupas collect in a reddish lattice before a long, aloof cadence of snow. The hues feel monastic, discipline without chill. The village does not crouch in the mountain's shadow, it balances it, a human chord written to harmonize with a geologic drone. When he introduces figures, they are often traveling. Pilgrims, messengers, riders. This movement is not anecdote. It is a sign that the human condition for him is pilgrimage, intention unfolding over ground. Even the saints move. Milarepa, the one who hearkened, for example, sits still, but the mountain listens with him. The world leans in, and the lean is movement. His banners of the east and Shambhala cycles flame with expectancy. Riders cross night blue skies, torches tilt, stars crowd low as if the air had become a harbor for messages. The iconography is not parochial. A painting such as Madonna Oriflamma lifts a Christian figure into a Himalayan color world and hands her a banner marked by 3 spheres within a circle. Elsewhere, Krishna, spring in Kulu, situates the god in an orchard's lucid riot. The syncretism is not a fashion but a decision. If truth is one, its saints are many. If goodness is one, its colors multiply without contradiction. And then there is Kangchenjunga, painted and repainted like a litany. The mountain is a chord struck at dusk. Plains of violet and blue stack gently, as if to teach the eye how to carry weight without anxiety. The clouds measure out the air. A valley darkens, not into danger but into rest. You can almost hear the sound a peak makes when it sheds the day. A high, inaudible bell. Urusvati, a research institute at the world's roof. In the Kulu Valley above Naga, they found a long ridge of air that felt like home. Deodar cedars held the slopes. The river moved like a cool chain in the distance. Snow peaks stood like patient elders. There, in 1928, they founded the Urusvati Himalayan Research Institute. The name, Urusvati, the morning star, was a choice that revealed how they thought about knowledge. Not the sun itself, but the lucid herald that delivers people to it. The institute was less a building than a federation of curiosities. Botany lived alongside ethnography, Tibetan studies next to pharmacology, folklore in the same room as rock samples. A herb collected on a pass might send a note to a chemist on another continent. A tale told by a shepherd could prompt a scholar in Sanskrit to consider an unexpected echo. Roerich supervised as a painter supervises. He looked for balance. The point was not to conquer a discipline, but to keep disciplines in conversation, so that errors would be less likely to harden into dogma. His son, Yuri, the polymath linguist and Tibetologist, became an intellectual axis, field notes in one hand, grammar in the other. Svetoslav painted with the ease of someone who had inherited both talent and purpose. Helena kept the whole from scissoring into vanity. Her notebooks and letters shaped a climate in which people knew that the aim was not reputation, but service. Visitors recall a seriousness without gloom. The Institute's rooms had the odor of herbs and paper, the verandas, the carved beams, the clink of cups. From this ridge, Roerich could see seasons move like large thoughts. In summer, the valley braided greens. In winter, the world simplified into plains the size of hymns. He painted. He wrote. He corresponded about the protection of cultural treasures and about exhibitions that would bring the work to audiences who might, upon seeing a painting of a far Tibetan fortress, decide that a remote roof was also theirs. Urusvati also practiced a delicacy that institutions sometimes misplace: gratitude. The Institute's publications thanked villages for stories, monastics for access to libraries, guides for weather wisdom, artisans for the proper names of implements. In this, Roerich's painterly ethics became organizational policy. Accuracy is a kind of love. Correct naming is courtesy. A well-drawn plane is a handshake. A banner for culture, a pact for peace. What should a painter do with the knowledge that beauty, like life, is fragile? He should paint, yes, but he should also argue for protection in a language the world can quickly understand. Roerich began to propose that cultural sites, museums, libraries, universities, places of worship, deserve explicit treaty-level safeguarding not only in war but in peace. People protect what they can see, so he drew a sign. On a white field, a red circle containing 3 red spheres. He called it the Banner of Peace. The symbol is austere enough to resist misunderstanding, yet rich enough to invite layered meanings. The 3 spheres can stand for art, science, and religion embraced by the larger whole of culture. Or they can be past, present, and future held within the continuity of time. Or they can be 3 flames in a common lamp. The point is not to enforce a single reading, but to insist, vividly, that the places where the species keeps its memory must not be sacrificed, not even to good intentions elsewhere. He traveled and wrote as the banner made its quiet rounds. In April 1935, in Washington, D.C., a treaty was signed by the nations of the Pan American Union recognizing the protection of cultural institutions and monuments. The painter had become a diplomat of conscience. The pact did not make the world gentle, but it named a gentleness that the world could no longer pretend to ignore. Later conventions would broaden and refine this effort, but the first clear gesture, raising a banner so soldiers and civilians alike would know what must be spared, belonged to Roerich and his collaborators. He brought the banner into paintings. Madonna Oriflama shows the Virgin as guardian of the sign, the red spheres concentrated in her hands like a hearth. In other canvases, riders carry the emblem as if to seed the idea in distant valleys. A painting can propose an ethic, a treaty can give it legs. He had long believed that art, science, and religion lose their nobility when they refuse to walk together. The banner, simple as a child's drawing, made that union legible on a wall, a flagpole, a treaty page. The discipline of plains. Returned to his studio in Naga. At one end, bowls crusted with tempera. At the other, clean boards stacked like quiet doors. He begins by rejecting the pleasure of improvisation. He chooses a ground tone that will remain visible, however lightly, in the final picture, an underbreath. He blocks in mountain masses with a few large gestures, then stands and stares long enough to become a viewer of his own attempt. If he can sense the climb, he continues. If he cannot, he erases with a cloth dampened in patience. He thinks in sentences more than nouns. A ridge is a clause, a valley, a comma, a monastery, a word set in italics. Clouds are sparing because he declines to let them talk over the mountain. If the air calls for cloud, he enters one or two bands, thin and honest, placed where wind would have made them. He tests edges with the tenderness of a carpenter fitting a joint. The margin between snow and stone must not fray into romance. Where he softens, he does so for a reason, distance, haze, or mercy. Every plane has a duty. A dark foreground gives the eye a foothold. A middle plane conducts like a bridge. A high plane resolves the chord. He often slips a small warmth into snow, the last garnet breath of the day, not for prettiness but to register the world's refusal to become monochrome. His blues vary by context. Cobalt for afternoons that have decided, ultramarine for mornings that still consider, a grade blue for the sadness that can enter even the most beautiful ridge without becoming tragedy. He does not disdain detail. He simply refuses to spend it poorly. A stupa's geometry will be correct. A monastery's windows will read. A rider's spear will find its place. Yet these particulars never cross the line into applause-seeking. They serve the whole. He has learned from the theatre that the stage devours fidget. If a brushstroke does not carry, it must sit down. The discipline is not cruelty. It is kindness to the viewer, who deserves rest as well as thrill. Teachers and messengers, sacred figures in a high country. Roerich paints sacred persons as if the world were their proper garment. Milarepa sits in a bowl of blue so large that song seems the only possible speech. A thin line of snow marks the horizon like the resting mouth of a bell. The saint's hand cups his ear, the gesture that gave him his epithet, the one who hearkened. What, then, is the mountain doing? Listening back. The reciprocity is the point. The world is not inert. It responds to the posture of the heart. In Krishna, spring in Kulu, a god's music enters an orchard. Blossoms sob quietly with light. The mountain's blue becomes an instrument's drone. The painting is not a myth imported into a landscape. It is a recognition that landscape and myth are two sides of one bright cloth. In other works, messengers on horseback cross a sky that looks engineered for annunciations. Flames do not burn the night so much as articulate it. These pictures belong to a long meditation on Shambhala, the idea that wisdom shelters within the world, traveling like heat under snow, surfacing where cold hearts call for thaw. He can also paint saints without name, a traveler who pauses to consider a shrine, a mother leading a child along a pathogenic ledge, a monk leaning into wind. These secularized icons teach the same doctrine as their titled cousins, that posture matters, that the angle of a neck can be a prayer. In a different register, his Russian holy figures, St. Sergius, St. Pantaleimon, carry a related clarity. They do not strain to be miraculous. They are precise, as if the holy had chosen exactness as a style. Taken together, these cycles reject the impulse to separate spiritual and terrestrial. The mountain is a teacher not because it stands near heaven, but because it has practiced standing without complaint for a very long time. The saint is a messenger not because he declares metaphysics, but because he listens. If there is a moral here, it is written in the simplest script: climb well, keep faith, protect what protects you. A brief returning to origins. One could forget, looking at the pale thunder of his Himalayan canvases, that Roerich had once been a preeminent painter of Russia's medieval imagination. But the continuities are plain. The fortresses of strongholds of Tibet are cousins to the Kremlin walls and wooden citadels he painted earlier. Both announce that human communities everywhere find forms that rhyme with their terrain. The banners lifted by Himalayan riders echo the heraldic color of old Russia's chronicles. Even his preservation work, the impulse that would birth a pact, was seeded when he painted ancient architecture and saw how easily it could be lost. A painter, he learned early, is a witness. A witness is a guardian. There is also a kinship of light. The Russian north knows a long dusk, a patient, silver hour when edges relax and meanings collect. High Asia knows an inverse clarity, a noon that refuses ambiguity. Roerich learned to carry both moods in one hand. When he paints a Tibetan monastery in evening, you can sometimes feel a Russian twilight underneath, as if two homelands had not chosen to quarrel. In this sense, the Himalayas did not replace Russia for him. They completed a circle. The painter at day's end. At dusk in Naga, the Kulu Valley lies in fat bands of blue. The pine cliffs breathe resin. A child calls from a courtyard. A dog answers as if answering were law. He closes the sketchbook, covers the bowls, sets the brushes to dry. Painting at altitude requires the day's cooperation, and the day is almost done. He steps onto the veranda and looks east. The far peaks collect the last light like a sacrament. He thinks about what to do tomorrow. A small canvas of a chorten above the river, a reconsidered edge on a Kangchenjunga study, a letter about the banner to a friend in a far capital. The list is not long. The work is. In Heart of Asia, he has a way of finishing a description with a word like a bell. Listen, remember, guard. His canvases do the same. They do not end, they release. After you step away from Tibet, Himalayas, or path to Kailas, the mountain remains in your chest, a lucid weight. Artists sometimes call this resonance. He might have called it service, the painting doing its work after the eyes close. Roerich died in Naga in 1947. His ashes rest in the valley that had made him a neighbor of the highest things. The snow receives everything, he might have said, but the work does not melt. The peaks continue their soft instruction. To look until looking becomes listening, to climb until height becomes depth, to paint until color tells the truth. Notes on a vocabulary of light. Plane, not merely a region of color, but a rung. The eye climbs, the spirit follows. A plane must be clean enough to carry weight without chatter. You can feel this most clearly in foreground slopes that offer foothold without bristling. Edge, a moral choice. Sharpen for severity, soften for mercy. In his snow lines, the distinction matters. Too sharp and the world becomes brittle. Too soft and it dissolves into vagueness. The correct edge is a statement of character. Atmosphere, the most honest subject. Paint the air, and the mountain will arrive on its own. He often began with air, a middle tone that keeps the whole composition breathing even as mass accretes. Scale. The human is not small, it is placed. A diminutive figure in a vast amphitheater does not vanish, it harmonizes. Scale is the art of telling truth without humiliation. Color. Fewer notes, cleaner intervals. Ultramarine beside blue-gray. The sudden apricot at dawn. The green that is not grass but the light itself. Discipline makes radiance visible. Restraint opens the hand. Symbol. The three spheres are a thesis about civilization. That our knowing, our making, and our worship are siblings best kept in one house. A symbol on a banner can save buildings. A symbol in a painting can save a day's attention. The work named, more fully annotated, Path to Kailas, 1932-33, tempera. Multiple versions trace a pilgrim's road toward the sacred mountain. In some, a carved boulder anchors the foreground, its red script, a vocal presence. In others, the path zigzags through light like a self-correcting thought. Roerich lets the sky's unusual green do philosophical work. Morning there belongs to another element, and travelers must learn its grammar. The painting proposes the path not merely as geography, but as a way to keep a promise to oneself. Strongholds of Tibet, early 1930s, tempera. A suite in which fortress walls take on the dignity of vertebrae. The ridges carry them forward. The light abrades them into clarity. The color is ascetic. Ochres, violets, bone whites, deliberately refusing the easy romance of picturesque ruin. He paints the structures as living decisions, adaptations, not relics. Tibet, Himalayas, 1933, tempera. Village and monastery collect in red and brown beneath a procession of snow. Stupas, precise and lucid, give the composition its pulse. The sky's firm blue holds the whole arrangement like a good frame. The more you breathe with it, the more the picture teaches oxygen. Milarepa, the one who hearkened, 1925 tempera. A small saint in a blue world with very long ears. The mountains listening, the saints listening, the viewers listening. These are not three acts, but one. Roerich places the figure slightly off-center so that the world can lean toward him without theatricality. Krishna, Spring in Kulu, 1930, tempera. A joyous reserve. Blossoms speak in a quiet riot. The deity's presence is as natural as weather. The mountains are not spectators. They hum a drone on which the melody rests. Madonna Oriflama, 1932, tempera. The banner becomes liturgy. The three spheres, concentrated and calm, gather the painting's theology into the gentlest of commands. Guard what guards you. Kangchenjunga, 1944, tempera. Dusk braids, blue and violet, a few horizontal clouds meter the air. The peak does not perform, it abides. The painting's peace comes from the good tensions. Weight resolved by slope, depth resolved by color, human desire settled by a more patient magnitude. Reading Heart of Asia in the paintings. The book and the canvases are a single argument for attention. In Heart of Asia, chapters often move from a particular, the slant of a roof, the rumor of a rider, the taste of tea sipped in thin air, into a reflection that declines to hurry. The paintings do the reverse. They begin in meditation and then disclose particulars. Look at Path to Kailas after reading his pages about how mornings open in the highlands. You will recognize the green that is almost not green, the quiet in which even small sounds feel like counsel. Read his account of butter lamps, then stand before Tibet, Himalayas, and watch the stupas glimmer without light. The caravan's detainment is etched into the canvases as a geometry of austerity. Snowfields are calm, not blank. Walls are stern, not severe. A viewer may not know the story and yet will feel the gravity. The book uses sentences to keep memory honest. The paintings use planes. Both practices teach the same courtesy. Proclaim less, show more. Invite, do not insist. Clear a path and trust that the viewer or reader will walk it. He writes that conviction arises from a continuous gathering of real perceptions. The paintings operationalize that line. Their clarity is not dogma. It is the dividend of careful noticing. Together, word and image form a way of living. Watch steadily, climb with tact, protect the things that increase humanity's capacity for gentleness. What remains? Institutions age. Names on treaties fade. Museums change addresses. Collections migrate. Banners are folded and unfolded by hands that never touched the high passes. But the canvases carry on their quiet work. They do not require that the viewer know the subtleties of Tibetan history or Russian art movements. They ask only that the viewer stand, breathe, and look until the planes consent to organize themselves. Then something familiar happens. The day slows, the breath deepens. The heart remembers a promise it once made, to be not merely entertained by beauty, but steadied by it. Consider the experience of leaving a Roerich exhibition late in the afternoon. The street's noise seems kinder. Edges on buildings appear friendlier, less eager to cut. You notice, perhaps for the first time in weeks, how the sky passes from blue to pale green before relinquishing itself to dusk. You may not think, I have learned a doctrine. You will almost certainly think, I have been given a posture. That is the painter's gift. Short factual timeline for bearings. 1874, born in St. Petersburg. Early double training in law and art. Archaeological work alongside painting. 1900s to 1910s. Stage and set designs. Leadership in art education. Major collaborations in theater. International reputation develops. 1913. Designs for Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, stage worlds that reintroduce archaic Russia to modern eyes. 1920s, leaves Russia, travels and exhibits in Europe and America, turns decisively toward Asia. 1925 to 1928, Central Asian expedition through Sikkim, Ladakh, Chinese Turkestan, Mongolia, Tibet, winter detainment on the plateau, eventual passage south. 1928. Founding of the Urusvati Himalayan Research Institute in Nagar, Kulu Valley, India. 1929 to 1930. Publication of travel writings including Altai Himalaya and Heart of Asia. 1930s. Shambhala and Himalayan cycles mature. Public advocacy for the banner of peace. April 1935. Roerich Pact signed in Washington, D.C. to protect cultural institutions and monuments. 1940s. Late Himalayan works, including Meditations on Kangchenjunga. 1947. Death in Naga, ashes interred in the valley that formed his final studio. Coda, the morning star. On certain Kulu mornings, the planet Venus rises before the sun, a hard white bead above the first band of light. Urusvati, the morning star, the institute took its name from that bright instruction. It is not the sun, it is the herald. Roerich's art belongs to that heralding. It does not blind, it guides. It asks you to look long enough for the plains to organize themselves, to read mountains the way you read a rite, to keep faith with what peaks and monasteries, saints and banners have been telling us all along, that culture is a proposal about how to live and that beauty is its most persuasive argument. So the painter in the frost-stiff tent steadies his hand. The first thin band of light turns ridges rose ash. The snow's green appears like breath. He lays in another plane, and another. The mountain is not yet there, and yet it is. The brush has found its altitude, the canvas, its vow. Somewhere in the painter's kit is a little flag, 3 red spheres in a red ring on white, folded like a thought. He will raise it later in paint if not in wind. For now the peaks do the blessing.
Echoes rise from the valley low. Shadows stretch where the cold winds blow. 1,000 voices in the stone. Oh, whisper, whisper, whisper of the mountains, oh, chant, chant through the ancient fountains, oh, whisper, whisper. The earth hums with its story. Feet on earth, but my soul takes flight through the clouds and the endless night. The monks call the stars by name. Deep tones rumble in the core, calling spirits forevermore. Breath of life in every sound, mystic circles spinning round. Oh, whisper, whisper, whisper of the mountains, oh, chant, chant through the ancient fountains, oh, whisper, whisper. The earth hums with its story. Through the mist where the llamas sing, through the winds where the clear.